The heat shimmered across the cracked, rust-colored surface of the dead planet as Rhett Cade made his descent. His boots crunched over fractured stone and brittle metallic debris half buried in sand. Behind him, the smoldering remains of the atmosphere rippled from a long-forgotten war, the distant hum of power cells still discharging beneath the crust. Rhett, ex-military turned independent salvager, had seen plenty of post-conflict zones, but this one, Zerna 9, felt quieter than most. Not peaceful, just hollow. The terrain sloped downward into what had once been a ravine, but was now half filled with the collapsed remains of an alien vessel. Its elegant curves twisted and ruptured by impact. Blackened metal jutted upward like broken bones. He paused at the crest, eyes scanning the wreckage through polarized lenses. The air was sharp with ozone and scorched carbon. No recent tracks. No sign of active tech. Good. His exosuit hissed faintly as he stepped forward, stabilizers adjusting to the uneven slope. Salvage had become more than just a way to get by. It was how he kept himself busy enough not to remember. He preferred machines over people now. Machines didn't scream when you couldn't save them. Machines didn't ask why you'd lived when others hadn't. Inside the wreck, light dimmed to a murky green hue, filtered through the fractured remains of the ship's biolum panels. The air tasted like copper. Rhett moved methodically, recording valuable components, slicing out modules with his arc blade. His visor mapped the ship's partial blueprint in real time, identifying 2 cargo holds, a med bay, and a sealed chamber deeper inside. The tech was definitely Federan, sleek, over-engineered, and rare as hell since the treaty. He followed the broken corridor to a hatch partially blocked by a collapsed bulkhead. The air was colder here. He hesitated, knelt, and placed a gloved hand on the deck. Faint vibrations. Power was still circulating somewhere within. He narrowed his eyes. Not dead, he muttered. Just wounded. He pried the door with a pull spike and slipped through the narrow gap. The chamber beyond was small, circular, with translucent panels displaying alien script and pulsating dimly. The remains of a control console lay smashed in the corner. Scattered across the floor were discarded harnesses, broken restraints, and what looked like feeding apparatus. There was a foul smell beneath the metal, something organic. Recent. Rhett swung his rifle forward, scanning the room. The soft clatter of something shifting in the darkness caught his attention. He pivoted slowly. A low, guttural growl echoed from behind a pile of crumpled debris. He froze. The growl came again, hoarse and dry, like a throat and used a sound. Then a shape emerged, small, trembling, bone-thin. It stepped into the faint light. White fur streaked with grime. Oversized claws dragging along the floor. Pale pink eyes, wide and intelligent, locked onto him with a gaze that held no fear, only exhaustion. "Son of a," he whispered. The creature was no ordinary animal. It looked like a wolf, but distorted. Its frame was compact, underfed, yet clearly built for speed and power. Its fur, albino and patchy, clung to sharp ribs. Its mouth opened slowly, revealing fangs that shimmered faintly with bioenhancement. It didn't snarl. It just stared. Rhett lowered his rifle a fraction, scanning. A subdermal tracking implant blinked faintly under the fur at the creature's neck. There were surgical scars across its spine, symmetrical, precise. Engineered. Bred. Modified. Biocompanion unit, he said under his breath. The wolf-like thing didn't react to the words. Its head tilted just slightly. Then it slumped forward, too weak to stand. Rhett stepped cautiously closer, boots crunching softly. He stopped a meter away. The smell of infection was unmistakable. The creature's flank was swollen and matted with dried fluid. Whoever had left it here hadn't just forgotten it. They'd abandoned it to die. A flash of heat rose in his chest, fury at the cruelty, and something else. Something older. Regret. He knelt. You gonna lunge? Or you gonna listen? No response. The creature's breathing was shallow, almost silent. Its eyes tracked him, but it made no move. With slow, deliberate hands, Rhett pulled a ration tube from his belt, popped the seal, and laid it on the floor between them. The creature flinched at the sound, then sniffed weakly. After a long pause, it edged forward, mouth trembling. It took the tube between its teeth and backed away. The movement was shaky but deliberate. Smart, Rhett muttered. Didn't think veterans made stupid pets. He surveyed the chamber again. The feeding units were empty. The floor was scratched with signs of pacing, circular tracks, neurotic, agitated. This wasn't just a creature. They'd kept it caged, alone, for a long time. He activated his comm log and dictated a field note. 1 Type B, Federan biological unit found alive. Malnourished, scarred. Evidence suggests long-term confinement. Ship logs corrupted. No sign of crew. No automated defense response. He paused, looking at the creature. It had curled against the far wall now, licking the remains of the ration tube with feverish attention. It was dying, but not yet dead. He should report it. Protocol demanded he tag the bioform, mark the wreck as active, and wait for planetary quarantine forces. Salvagers weren't authorized to remove living alien tech, especially not experimental life forms. The penalties were severe. But as he watched the creature's thin body shiver, he remembered a different kind of shiver. Human, desperate, abandoned. From a voice over comms, he hadn't answered fast enough. A man named Darren, trapped under wreckage during the final siege. Rhett had chosen the mission over the man, and Darren had died. He moved toward the creature again. It watched, but didn't recoil. He extended his hand. You want a shot at getting out of here? Or, you want to ride with the ship? The creature stared at him. Then, unsteadily, it pushed itself to its feet. The motion was labored, pained, but willing. He clicked open the side hatch on his pack. Come on, I've got antibiotics and heat packs. The thing limped forward, one leg dragging. Rhett adjusted the opening. It hesitated just before entering, sniffed again, and then collapsed inside the padded compartment with a heavy exhale. He sealed it, securing the bioform with a field lock, then turned and surveyed the room one last time. Lights flickered, a soft pulse humming through the walls. Somewhere deeper in the ship, systems still stirred. He didn't like that. With one last glance at the containment module on his back, Rhett turned and started to climb back toward the surface. Whatever he just picked up wasn't just a wounded animal. It was something made, something abandoned, and something potentially dangerous, but something alive. The suns had begun to dip when he emerged, the sky bleeding into hues of violet and flame. He exhaled, stretching the tension from his spine. Then he tapped his comms, encrypting a log entry before deletion. No survivors found, he said, and turned toward his rover, the pack on his back shifting faintly with movement inside. The rover hummed low across the ash plains, its reinforced treads grinding over rock and rubble with practiced ease. Rhett sat in the pilot's cradle, eyes flicking between the terrain and the flickering vitals displayed on his wrist panel. The creature, no, the wolf, lay in the containment module behind him, cocooned in a thermal recovery wrap. Internal sensors registered its breathing, shallow but stable. Rhett didn't look back. He told himself it was caution. He wasn't sure what it was, not really. Too intelligent to be called an animal. Too altered to be anything natural. It had watched him on the way out of the wreckage, never blinking, never snarling. Like it was waiting to see if he'd change his mind and leave it behind. He didn't, but that didn't mean he knew what to do next. The rover crested a dune and descended into a narrow canyon where Rhett had set up his outpost. Nothing permanent, just a modular shell buried into the canyon wall, powered by a solar array and a pair of emergency plasma cores. It was home in the most technical sense of the word. He pulled into the docking bay, doors hissing closed behind him, and disembarked. The silence inside the structure felt dense, almost expectant. He hauled the containment module into the med bay, setting it gently on the table and triggering the atmospheric seal. The lid retracted with a soft hiss. The wolf stirred. Its eyes opened, dull, uncertain but alert. It tried to rise, collapsed halfway, then looked up at him with a kind of resigned defiance. "You're stubborn," Rhett said, crouching beside it. "Good. Means you might live." He cleaned the worst of the wounds first. Old, inflamed punctures along the legs and neck, symmetrical surgical scars on its back, bruises that hadn't fully faded. Every mark told a story, and all of them were cruel. The worst was a damaged implant socket just behind its left ear, where a connection port had been removed too violently. Rhett couldn't tell if it was standard tech or custom alien work, but it was brutal. The wolf let out a low sound, something between a growl and a whimper. Its muscles tensed under his touch, but never lashed out. Rhett recognized the behavior. A creature that had learned pain came from contact, but punishment came from resistance. He worked silently, applying a broad-spectrum antibiotic gel and running a scanner over the worst of the injuries. Nothing terminal, but would take time. Rest. Food. "What did they do to you?" he asked softly. It blinked once, slow and heavy. He stood and crossed the room to a storage unit. Inside were emergency rations, some for humans, some for synthetics, and a few that worked for anything with protein-based metabolism. He warmed a pack and placed it near the creature's mouth. It sniffed, hesitated, then began to eat. Fast at first, then with more control, as if realizing it wouldn't be taken away. That was the first moment Rhett realized how quiet the room had become. The wolf's eating was the only sound, rhythmic and focused. He sat down nearby, not watching it directly. That kind of space mattered. "Gonna need to call you something," he said. "Can't keep saying wolf like you're a damn cryptid." The creature paused, looked at him, then resumed eating. "Nox," Rhett said. "Means night. You got the color for it." No reaction, but the name felt right. He spent the next 2 hours checking equipment, patching up the rover, reviewing the small haul of tech he'd managed to extract from the wreck. It wasn't much: 2 working memory cores, a ephedrine sensor rig, and what looked like a prototype navigation module. Sellable, but not exceptional. Certainly not enough to justify sticking around if that ship was going to start leaking radiation, or worse, transmitting. From the corner of the room, he heard soft movement. He turned. Nox had stood up, wobbly but upright. It took a few steps forward and sat, watching him. Not like an animal waiting for a command, more like a technician waiting to see what came next. Rhett raised an eyebrow. "You gonna help me sort memory cores?" Nox tilted its head. He reached over to the NAV module, popped the housing, and began to examine the components. It was slow work. Ephedrine circuitry was notoriously complex, half-organic, and riddled with encrypted failsafes. He was 30 seconds into the dissection when Nox limped forward and placed a paw on the table. With surprising delicacy, it nudged one of the cores he'd set aside, pushing it away from the open unit. "Not that one," Rhett muttered. Nox lowered its head slightly. Rhett switched it for the other and resumed. The core synced immediately, data pouring into his console like water through a breached hull. He looked at the creature. "You were trained for this." The realization settled like a stone in his chest. Nox hadn't just been designed. It had been built for work. Integrated systems, manual adjustments, likely meant to serve as a living interface for the ship's AI. Not a pet, not a companion, a tool. which meant someone had decided it wasn't worth retrieving. He set the tools down. Knox lay back down near the wall, tail tucked, watching him. Rhett leaned forward, elbows on the table. "I've seen a lot of tech repurposed after the war," he said. Sentry drones turned into harvest bots. War mechs used as cargo lifters. But you're something else. Knox didn't respond, but it didn't look away. Rhett rubbed his jaw. "You understand me. Not just instinct. You know words. Still nothing. Can't speak. But you could once. Or communicate. Through that port." He remembered the missing connector. The torn interface. Whatever method Knox had used to talk was gone now, ripped away when it was no longer convenient. Something about that made Rhett's stomach turn. Later that night, he sat at the edge of his sleeping platform, the lights dimmed to soft amber. Knox lay curled near the door, not caged, not ordered, just present. Rhett stared at the cracked ceiling, the silence between them as heavy as the planet's gravity. "You know," he said quietly, "I've left people behind too. People I could have saved. Not proud of it." The words tasted bitter. "But I didn't leave you." A pause. Knox made a low sound. Not a growl. Not quite a whimper. It was soft. Almost inquisitive. Rhett turned his head. "What?" Another sound. A single syllable in a tongue not spoken, but shaped. It vibrated through the air, subtle, like a coded pulse. Not speech, more like memory. Familiar. Glitched. Then it was gone. Rhett sat up straight, heart ticking a little faster. Knox stared back at him, unblinking. "You remember how to talk to machines," he said slowly. "Just not how to talk to me." Outside, the desert wind howled faintly beyond the rock walls. Inside, the light hummed low, and the creature that had been left to die watched the man who didn't. They were both broken things, but now they weren't alone. The diagnostic screen lit up with a soft pulse, indicating partial memory core decryption. Rhett hunched over the console, fingers flying across the interface, watching code unfurl like ancient script breathing again. Most of it was corrupted, fragments of mission logs, operational parameters, AI, subroutines. But tucked between the wrecked blocks was something intact. A recording timestamped just days before the crash. He initiated playback. The audio hissed to life, overlaid with a crackling visual feed. The image showed a tall figure in ornate armor, Fedrin unmistakably. Its face was hidden behind a semi-translucent mask, voice modulated and sharp. Bioform Unit 9X initiated response protocol during neural stress calibration. Hostility noted. Reclassification pending. Recommend decommission. Extraction team notified. The feed ended. Rhett leaned back in his chair. Knox lay curled nearby, eyes half closed, but he knew the creature had been listening. Its ears twitched at every word. The term 9X wasn't just a designation. It was a sentence. "You resisted," Rhett said, glancing down. They didn't like that. Knox said nothing, but its breathing had changed, shallower, tighter. Rhett remembered what the wreckage had looked like. The torn restraints, the damaged port, the way the chamber had felt less like a lab and more like a cell. Whatever that resistance had been, physical, mental, or otherwise, it had marked the wolf for disposal. He stared at the console, jaw tight. He wasn't a hero. Not anymore. Maybe never was. But something about this story wouldn't let go of him. Maybe it was because it mirrored his own in too many uncomfortable ways. A soft chime from the system interrupted his thoughts. Incoming transmission. Encrypted, high frequency, short range. He frowned. That shouldn't have been possible unless someone was close. Too close. He activated the signal trace. It bounced once, then locked. A hovering relay drone was parked less than 4 clicks away, masked beneath the static wash of the planet's ion layer. Rhett's blood went cold. He scrambled to mute the outpost's transponder beacon. Whoever was out there hadn't just stumbled on his location. They'd been following the signal from the memory core or tracking the biological implant in Nox. He checked the containment module again. The subdermal tag was active. Sloppy. He should have disabled it first thing. He grabbed his toolkit and moved to Nox. Hold still. The creature didn't flinch as Rhett rolled it gently onto its side. He scanned for the tag, found the implant cluster beneath the shoulder, and injected a suppressor. The tag flickered once, then went dark. But the damage had been done. If the relay drone had already pinged his coordinates, whoever wanted Nox dead or reclaimed would be inbound soon. He stood, pacing. The outpost had defenses, but they were minimal. Enough to deter scavengers, not mercenaries. And he had no illusions about who might come looking for stolen biotech. Federans didn't like to leave loose ends. His mind spun through options. Abandon the outpost? Flee in the rover? Not fast enough. Not stealthy enough. And Nox wouldn't survive a drawn-out escape. Unless he turned back to the decrypted core. There was still another chunk of data unexamined, buried under multiple encryptions. Rhett bypassed the logic gate and found a subdirectory labeled ArcNode. Inside was a schematic, ship layout, systems guide, internal maps. But this wasn't the wreck he'd salvaged. It was another vessel, one not listed in any public archive. A prototype. Then it clicked. The ship he'd found had been a test bed, not a destination. It wasn't a project. It was part of something larger. The coordinates attached to the schematic pinged a location less than 200 clicks north, buried under a tectonic fold. Rhett stared at the data. His fingers tapped the console in thought. If they wanted Nox, it wasn't just because of what the wolf was, but because of what it knew, what was built to interact with. The prototype ship might still be active, or hidden. Either way, it was leverage. It was purpose. He moved fast. Supplies were packed in minutes. Ration packs, med stims, a portable energy core, and the encrypted memory drive. He secured Nox in the rover again, this time reinforcing the compartment with thermal damping and sensor baffles. The creature was more alert now, watching him with sharper eyes. "We're going north," Rhett said, strapping into the pilot's seat. "You want to hang on?" The rover blasted out of the canyon mouth, carving a narrow trail across the gray desert. The twin suns were just beginning to set, shadows growing long and strange. Rhett kept an eye on the rearview scope. No sign of pursuit. Yet, as the terrain shifted from sand to hardened volcanic rock, Nox stirred behind him. Rhett glanced back. The wolf had forced itself upright within the module. Paws braced, staring through the reinforced glass. Its body still trembled from exertion, but its gaze held clarity. "You recognize the coordinates," Rhett said. "That ship, it's important to you." Nox made a low sound, deep in its chest. Not a growl, more like a memory surfacing. Then, to Rhett's astonishment, it lifted one paw and tapped a small, rapid rhythm against the side of the module. A repeating pattern. He played it back on the console and ran a translation heuristic. The system spit out a crude phrase, "Home not dead." Rhett blinked. "There are more like you." The pattern repeated. He pushed the rover harder, speed kicking dust behind them in great curling wakes. Every bump jolted the frame. Ahead, the land rose into jagged cliffs, the entrance to the fold. If the schematic was correct, there'd be an access shaft hidden beneath the basalt shelf. Dusk deepened into full night as Rhett parked the rover and activated the ground-penetrating scanner. The readings confirmed a hollow chamber 20 meters below. He prepped the descent drone, dropped it through a fissure, and watched the screen as it descended. The feed flickered to life. A hangar, massive, dormant, covered in dust but intact. And in the center, a vessel unlike anything Rhett had seen. Sleek, silent, waiting. He turned to Nox. "That it?" The creature stood, trembling, and growled. not at him, but at the distance between them and the truth. A sound full of pain and determination. They descended together. The tunnel was rough but navigable. Rhett led the way, pulse rifle slung across his back, scanning for motion. But the place was still, dead with the hush of sealed air. As they stepped into the hangar, Rhett's eyes widened. The ship shimmered faintly, as if reacting to their presence. And Knox limped forward, stronger now, head raised, breathing fast. The ship's hull lights flickered to life in a spiral pattern. Systems booted. Interfaces activated. It had been waiting for a signal. For a voice. For Knox. The creature stepped forward, placed one paw against the console panel at the base of the ramp. The ship responded instantly, hatch unfolding like a flower in bloom. Rhett turned to scan the darkness behind them. He didn't see anyone, but he felt it. They weren't alone anymore. The enemy had found them, and time was running out. The moment Knox activated the ship, the entire hangar seemed to breathe. Lights that hadn't flickered in decades pulsed softly from floor to ceiling, casting long, metallic reflections over the dust-laden panels. The vessel, sleek and seamless, unlike any human or even mainstream Fedran design, rumbled with a low harmonic vibration, as if acknowledging the return of its intended operator. Rhett stood motionless at the foot of the loading ramp, pulse rifle loose in his hands, eyes flitting between the awakening ship and the dark passage from which they'd entered. He didn't trust the quiet. Too many years in salvage had taught him that silence wasn't safety, it was suspense, and they were no longer operating in obscurity. Behind him, Knox limped forward, its pace faster now, steadier. The proximity to the vessel, this forgotten ark buried beneath a lifeless planet, was breathing energy into the creature like it was a charger slot, and he the last surviving conduit. Rhett could see it in the way Knox's muscles moved, the way its posture shifted from defensive to alert. The wolf was remembering what it had once been, or maybe what it was meant to be. "Do you know how to fly that thing?" Rhett asked, not expecting an answer. Knox patted up the ramp, unhesitating, and placed its paw against a hollow emitter on the inner threshold. A cascading stream of alien script flowed down the interior hull, followed by the click and whir of startup protocols engaging. Rhett watched as the interface panels morphed into hybridized displays, half symbolic and half-coded in machine-readable syntax. He took a step forward. Guess that's a yes. But before he could enter, his wrist panel buzzed. A perimeter breach. He snapped his eyes back toward the tunnel entrance. There, shadows moving with purpose. Figures in light-shielded exosuits. Rifles held low but ready. Fedran retrieval unit. No insignia. Black armor. Private. Rhett ducked behind the ramp and checked his weapon. One clip. Standard charge. Enough for deterrence, not a standoff. He tapped the hull. "We've got company." Knox didn't look back, but let out a sharp, guttural growl that echoed through the ship's interior. A moment later, the ramp began to retract. "Wait!" Rhett leapt inside, just as the hatch sealed with a metallic hiss. The interior lit up in bands of soft amber, and the air pressure shifted. Sterile. Recycled. Still breathable. He turned to see Knox already at the forward console, paw extended, eyes narrowed in intense focus. The ship responded instantly. Display panels opened like petals, mapping out terrain, systems, nearby life signatures. One of the monitors blinked red, external threats identified. 5 contacts. He recognized the silhouette of a thermal seeker being deployed near the tunnel entrance. Don't suppose this ship has weapons? Knox's ears twitched. A second later, a side screen lit up with schematic data showing a ventral defense array, long dormant but intact. Rhett moved to the weapons station, fingers flying across the unfamiliar controls. Fortunately, it was more intuitive than expected, perhaps designed for semi-organic interfacing. He powered up the system, locked onto the signal beacons from the intruders, and launched a suppressive electromagnetic burst. The result was immediate. The nearest drone shorted midair and crashed to the ground in a smoking heap. The mercenaries dropped back behind cover, but they weren't retreating. "Stall them," Rhett said. "We need time." Knox let out a pulse, a rhythmic vibration that flowed through the ship's internal systems. Rhett wasn't sure what it meant, but a moment later, the engines came online. Quiet at first, then building into a low, resonant hum that shook the floor. The ship wasn't just starting. It was waking up. Through the main viewport, Rhett watched the hangar's overhead bulkhead begin to shift. Massive internal arms twisted, unlocked, and pulled back a camouflage blast door that had, until now, made the hangar invisible from the surface. Moonlight flooded in. Beyond the cliffs, the stars waited. A pulse on the screen warned of projectile locks. "They've called in a strike drone," Rhett muttered. "We're not going to make it out clean." He turned to Knox, who had now moved to his secondary console. Its paw tapped a circular interface, sending tendrils of light crawling up its foreleg like veins. The lights converged at its shoulder, the one Rhett had injected with a suppressor. The implant was reactivating. "You sure that's a good idea?" Rhett asked. Knox didn't hesitate. The moment the interface was complete, a wave of pulsing light rippled through the cockpit. Rhett felt it in his teeth, a low-frequency transmission too complex for human minds. But the ship responded like it had been missing its other half. Panels shifted, control sticks retracted. The ship no longer needed a pilot. It had one, and it wasn't human. They launched. The transition was almost seamless, one moment grounded, the next aloft. The vessel rose with elegant power, boosters folding inward as the ship cut through the air like a blade. Alarms screamed behind them as the strike drone accelerated to intercept, but Knox responded before Rhett even had to suggest it. The ship jinked to the right, released a high-frequency pulse, and sent the drone's guidance systems into a spiral. The enemy craft spiraled off course and exploded against the canyon wall. Rhett clutched the stabilizer rail. "I could get used to this." The stars opened ahead of them. Space wasn't far. This planet's exosphere was thin, barely a veil. They cleared it in under a minute. Once they breached the orbital line, Rhett moved to the NAV panel. "Where are we going?" Knox tapped the console again. The star map unfolded. A specific vector locked in, marked by a symbol Rhett didn't recognize. But he understood its meaning. A destination. Not Earth. Not Federn space. Something older. A home lost to records and memory. "You sure you want to go back there?" he asked. "Whatever they did to you, there could be more like them." Knox turned to him. It didn't speak, but something in its posture said everything. There might be others like it, left behind, abandoned, broken. And if there was a chance to reach them, Knox would take it. Rhett looked out the viewport. The stars blinked, distant and cold, yet somehow inviting. "I've spent years running from things I should have faced," he said quietly. "Guess it's time I stopped doing that." He moved to the co-pilot seat and strapped in. The ship shimmered, then surged forward, cutting across the dark like a memory rediscovered. Behind them, the planet shrank. Ahead, the unknown waited. Together, they moved toward it, not tools, not remnants, not forgotten things, but something more, something alive.